Hello, Nancy, and hello, everyone tuning in later or those who are joining momentarily. Hi there, Lasita. So, we are in Human Design Catalyst, Monday, May 20th, 2024. Love to see your backdrop. I set up my green screen too, so yeah, right now it's just kind of I don't know, just kind of a backdrop I made in Canva, but it's a lot of fun. Yeah, looks great. Hey, Pockets, great to see you here, Ricky. So I'm wearing my Crystals of Consciousness shirt. This is I got this from Von Paul. He found it, and yeah, today we're going to be continuing with our base theory exploration, and we're going to be looking at base 5. So really saving the best for last, kind of. Base 5 is really a very special base, as we'll see when we explore it. It is in the middle of the personality base mat. So it really is the sort of core base of what we get to experience as our subjective reality, as our phenomenological existence. We really identify strongly, no matter what base we are, no matter what personality base we have. Each and every one of us has a strong identification with base 5 because it is the base of personality itself. And so when we talk about passenger consciousness and what is the passenger is the personality. The personality is what is experiencing this. And it doesn't just mean the personality activations in your body graph. The personality activations are still mechanical. They still have to do with your aura and with the form and so on. And this is really, when we talk about base 5, we're really talking about the principle of the passenger itself, the principle of the thing experiencing life, the life. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my notes for base 5 here, and we can start looking at some of the keynotes. Also interesting that base 5 has no conflicts, that all the conflicts we looked at in the last two classes were between bases 1 and 2, and then between bases 3 and 4. There are no conflicts with base 5. It dissolves all of the conflicts. And we can see, if you look at this graphic here that I have highlighted, that in fact, let me even just share that graphic. This is, we can see these are the two mats, as they're called, and we see that the personality mat is, it has base 5 right there in the middle. And that is the base 5 symbol. The design mat has base 3 in the middle, which kind of shows how the body is one of the core aspects of the design, but the personality, yeah, base 5 right here. So let's see what we have as far as notes, and we can look at some of the keynotes as well. Yeah, and there's some other interesting connections, like as we saw last week, base 5 has connections to the mind, so even though it is personality, it still connects to the principle of mind, and that's perhaps one of the reasons why Ra would talk about the personality and the mind sort of ambiguously, just like he would talk about the design and the body ambiguously. And here we have the base 5 notes. So here, let's just begin. And also, if anyone here has a base 5 personality, just let me know. It'd be interesting to talk about your experience of that. I have a base 2 personality, personally. So base 5 is the principle of the subjective. Just like base 3, the body is the objective. The objectivity of the chemistry of the body, the objectivity of pain in the body, or hunger, or any of these chemical experiences. That's where we get the objectivity. It's so funny because I think in philosophy, people often get it backwards, and they would think what we experience from our body is somehow subjective, but it's not. That's one of the things we learn in base theory, is that the objectivity is actually the chemistry of the body. What is subjective is the personality, and the personality is the thing doing the thinking. The mind doesn't do the thinking. When we looked at base 2, we saw that base 2 was the principle of mind. Well, the mind doesn't think. The mind is the accumulation of thoughts. The mind is the accumulation of experiences. The mind remembers. It's the personality that thinks. I think. The thing that's doing the thinking is actually the passenger. And ultimately what this is the principle of presence. And it's also funny because when we think about thinking, often we think about going off in your head somewhere. Well, that's actually base two. Base two is remembering something and no longer being present because you are sort of removed from the presence. But thinking is actually identical to presence in some sense, that the act of thinking is really presencing and being present. So it's also kind of backwards from what you might imagine a meditator telling you, that that you need to get rid of all of your thinking and that is how you're going to be present. Well, no, if there's no thought, there's no presence. There's nothing there to be present if it is not something thinking. This actually reminds me of he calls himself the anti-guru, U.G. Krishnamurti, who said that really the activity of thought is the only thing that gives us continuity, and in this sense, presence. And so that it is literally like as we're going around existing, the personality is kind of saying, I think 1,000 times per second, and that's what's maintaining our presence in reality. And a comment from Ricky. She wonders how we would describe thinking for those with only design gates in the head ajna or no activations at all. Yeah, well, this is, I mean, we don't think in the ajna. We don't think in the head. I mean, this is, I think, what we're getting at here is there's a great quote from Jacques Lacan where he was asked about thinking. Let me see if I can pull it up really quick. Otherwise, I can just paraphrase it. And he said he doesn't think with, okay, here we go. We only think we think with our brains. That was the first bit of it. We only think we think with our brains. Personally, I think with my feet. That's the only way I really come into contact with anything solid. I do occasionally think with my forehead when I bang into something. But I've seen enough electroencephalograms to know there's not the slightest trace of a thought in the brain. So I think we really have to get to what we mean by thinking and when we talk about thinking. And he was saying that thinking was the presence of the experience of sensorial contact or connection, that he only really has a thought when he experiences, he's thinking with his feet because he was standing at that time. I'm thinking, I won't say where I'm thinking from. I'm sitting right now, right? But, we're thinking where we have contact with something else. That was kind of his point there, and that we think with the brain, but it's not actually so clear. That if we're talking about what it means to experience, or the quote was from Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst. So if we think about what it is to experience reality, to kind of remember in the first class we talked about the cockpit, and the cockpit is this idea of like at our subjective level. Let me see if I can just pull up. Let's find a good graphic here. Here we go. This one should be sufficient. And so if we kind of think about like how do we experience subjectively what is our lived life as a passenger in this form, then we are kind of in this cockpit. And this is the cockpit of presence where we basically can move from this cockpit into the mind. We're becoming present with our memories. We become absent from the outer world, and we're very present to our memories and to what we think about and reminiscing. Or we go to the opposite extreme, like say you're playing baseball and you become very present with the ball and you merge with the ball and you see yourself hitting the ball. That's becoming present with the movement. You can't be reminiscing in the mind and present with the movement. There's the trope of the soldier who has the picture of their partner back at home and they're thinking about their partner and they get killed. Well, that's because they're not present to the movement of what's going on around them. They're present to the memory of what happened in the past. And so the presence is right here in the middle, like this cockpit. And, when you close your eyes and go into a visionary state, that's becoming present with your unconscious, with your inner design. When you can't do that at the same time as you're noticing that your body is hungry or sleepy or tired or in pain. You can't, there's kind of like probably gurus or something who are, starving and they're trying to ignore the hunger of the body by going so fully into the design. They're closing their eyes and they're seeing Krishna right? That's because they become so present to the inner reality, the visionary state, that they no longer have any presence whatsoever to their body. So that's how, at a microscopic level, each of us experiences all five bases. Like the fifth base, the one we're looking at today, this is where you identify as yourself, basically, and this is the I think. This is the passenger that thinks. This is the passenger that is present to things. And then these other bases are ones the passenger has access to and kind of moves into. And I see a couple of comments there. Rachel, I am, therefore I think. Yeah, I like that so much better than the obverse. Nicola, what about random ideas that seem to come out of nowhere? Well, that would probably be the design, right? Because the design is kind of like, if you're in a visionary state, I remember once I was having a sort of a visionary experience, and I closed my eyes and I could see all this Mayan architecture, and I could see all of this incredible world, like a world that didn't exist out there. And I opened my eyes, and it's just, I'm in the forest and it's normal and everything. And I close my eyes, it's the same. No matter how many times I open and close my eyes, like the inner world was in parallel to the outer world. And when I closed my eyes and looked into the inner world again, it had continued existing somehow. And I just had this thought, where does this come from? I mean, it's the same thing I think I mentioned in our first base class about having a dream, where I was in a music shop and I started grabbing cassette tapes and putting them in and playing them, and it would be dum 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 dum. They'd all have songs, and I'm like, who wrote all these songs? Where do all these songs come from? The designer wrote them. When we look at the principle of design, this fourth base here, we really should see the principle of the designer in a way. It's like, this is the mind. Well, this is the designer, the inner designer that designs our dreams, that designs our inner landscape, that designs our visions, that solves problems without us knowing where the solution came from. And the solution just pops into our head as if out of nowhere. And then the personality goes, I think, and it claims, ownership of it. But really, it's just being present to something that the design has brought to it. The designer could be like the higher self. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting way to look at it. I don't know that it's identical, but it might have some connection to that. I mean, the designer, the design principle does seem to have some connection to the collective unconscious and connection to things. It's like, where do these things come from? That's what Carl Jung found. I mean, he found that people of non-Christian backgrounds were having dreams of Jesus and dreams of crosses. And he's like, where do these dreams come from? Well, they must be in the collective unconscious. And these alchemical dreams and these visions of, ancient Egyptian, like different, rituals and all sorts of things that people just get and they have no way of knowing them. Well, they must exist somewhere, and we must have some access to them. And then a question from Ricky, from a human design perspective, don't we think with our ajna? Well, it's a good question. Awareness is going to be a little different from thinking. I think we know with the ajna, and we solve. We have the solutions that we the pressure to solve things, and the pressure to figure things out. We were actually just talking about this in the entrepreneurship meetup, of the difference between if you have a defined head in ajna versus just a defined ajna, and what you kind of bring to it and so on. It really depends what we mean by thinking. I mean, working something out and solving a problem can be the ajna, the work of the ajna, right? Like, the pressure of the head is the pressure to solve, and then the ajna is what knows, and it can finally relax when it has solved it, and it has the solution, and then it knows something. And in the body graph, where else would thinking happen? Well, I guess it depends what we mean by thinking. I mean, awareness happens in the openness of the body graph, or in the awareness centers at a mechanical level. But the awareness that we bring to the openness is really being able to notice and experience and kind of gain the wisdom of the openness. So, right, and then I guess, Rachel says the spleen and solar plexus can think in a way. Yeah, I mean, one interesting experience Ra had during his encounter with the voices, he heard all the different centers talking to each other, and they weren't very nice to each other. He said the ajna talked to the spleen as if the spleen were an idiot. The ajna was so smart, and the spleen is just like this grunting, idiotic, or maybe the sacral grunts. But, they were kind of talking to each other in a way that wasn't very friendly. I guess it depends what we mean by thinking. If we mean cognitive activity, that happens everywhere in the body graph. Cognition, awareness, where we bring awareness to things. If we mean like thinking in the sense of like, here is a mathematical problem that you have to solve, then that would probably be the head and the ajna. But even that is a little bit tricky. Like, if I show up to a new workplace, I have an undefined ajna, and I can immediately bring my awareness to all of what the other people's knowledge, right? So I joined Amazon when I was a bit younger. I worked there for a few years. I could immediately, they were like, wow, this guy learned so fast. He picked up everything we do so quickly. I went really far, really fast. However, I don't have any energy to actually solve these big problems. I learned all their systems. I learned how they think. I obviously was doing a lot of thinking, but I wasn't really doing the work of the defined ajna, because at the end of the day, someone with a defined ajna might have a disadvantage at first and might learn really slowly when they go on to the job, but then they're so much more powerful because they say, this is a huge problem. We don't know what to do about this. It's the defined ajna person who then says, here's the solution. Let me show you the solution. Let me show you what I know. So, I mean, yeah, it's an interesting question of where is the thinking and what is the thinking. In the way that Ra's using the term, he's saying that the thinking is actually the personality itself. It's the activity of thought. And this kind of reminds me of UG Krishnamurti saying that all that we really are, our entire personality, is actually just the continuous activity of thought. And that if you stop the thought, the personality goes away. So, I mean, that's like thinking in a different sense than solving or knowing. It's not like figuring out like a mathematical problem. It's literally just like experiencing the flow of thought, even if the flow of thought is just like, that hurts. I'm hungry. That's funny. Oh, it's bright now. Oh, I have to close my eyes because it's too bright. Or like, I mean, whatever the thought is, like, is that really? So, I mean, I think that's kind of how we're using thinking now. Yeah, I'm going to see what Krishnamurti says about it. UG Krishnamurti. There's two Krishnamurtis. Everything in the Maya is a binary. And there's Jiddu Krishnamurti, and then there's UG Krishnamurti. I'm just going to post this for those who are interested. I'll just post this in the Discord, and I'll post it here in our comments if anyone wants to check it out. But this is UG Krishnamurti, and here's him talking about, he has a talk called What Thinking Is, and also Thought Destroys Life, and so about how thought is different. I'm posting these in the Discord as well, so you can find them there later. But yeah, really interesting kind of human design adjacent guy. Maybe a couple quotes from him. The natural state is not a thoughtless state. It is a state where thought stops choking you and falls into its natural rhythm. So you allow the thought to move, maybe as a passenger witnessing the thought rather than identifying with it. Although it's an interesting question of if the passenger actually is. What is the passenger? I guess the passenger is the witness, the thing experiencing and witnessing. And so I've been saying the passenger is the personality, but maybe even that is a little too inaccurate. Maybe the personality is ultimately the construct of what happens when we identify with thought. I don't know. So, okay, I'm going to go back to the notes, though, and let's look at some of the key notes. And we'll see what we find here. So, all right, base theory notes. So it is the subjective, the principle of presence. It is what says, I think. It is the personality, and it is space itself, the principle of space. Ra tells us we can never separate presence from personality, as well as the personality and the personality crystal. I mean, all of these terms we're so familiar with from human design, they all have their origin and base. And so even the notion of the personality crystal is really the crystal that is present to the form, the crystal that is the source of the I think, the crystal that is the origin of our subjectivity as individual subjects. Base 5 is about presence, and the 5 elements of presence in progressive order are type, fantasy, subjectivity, the subject again, rhythm, and timing. And that one really takes a left turn. I mean, type, fantasy, subjectivity kind of fit, but then we get into rhythm and timing, and it's like very, very interesting, this connection. Maybe we can just spend a minute kind of deconstructing these. And that these are the 5 signposts that a person with this base for their personality crystal, the signposts that they're living their purpose. And so these are the, I put them in the comments there. So type, first of all, this is where we get type from at the macroscopic level. So even though Ra didn't introduce generators, projectors, manifestors, and reflectors, he was told in the encounter with the voice that there are 4 different aura types. And he did in the original Black Book, which was really his first foray into trying to formalize all of this information, put these keynotes. He has the base keynotes there from the very beginning. So even though he wouldn't really release type to the world for another 7 years or so, he had already talked about the word type, and he had kind of had this notion of type. Now, when Ra expounds on what he means by type, and how could type then be a signpost someone's really living their design? Well, the way he talks about type is kind of like girl next door type, or strong silent type, or, you know, the rock star type, or the pop star type. Or I watched the new Anne Hathaway movie the other day, and I was thinking about base 5 with it. It was, what's the film called? It was her newest one, The Idea of You. And she falls in love with a singer from a boy band. And the singer from the boy band is such a great example of the base 5, where even all of his conflicts and all of his sort of interiority and inner world are all wrapped up in base 5 issues. Base 5's issue is that they exemplify a type. Type is fantasy. People fantasize about that type. So this is where we get the 5th line projection field from. I mean, all this stuff comes from base 5. And in his subjectivity, his interiority, he kind of is feeling like he's not actually seen for who he is, that nobody actually sees his subjectivity, that they see him only as this type that they can fantasize about. And so it really is kind of this fundamental base 5 issue of who am I really? And it's funny enough that base 5 is actually here to not really have a personal expression as much. It's funny that the signpost of them living their design is how much they embody the type. So of course there's going to be a homogenized version of this which is not living their design, but really owning that type and kind of being exemplary of that type is actually a sign that they're very healthy and that they are fulfilling their purpose, that they actually are really living their design, because they're living out this larger than life, almost archetypal role, so that people see them and they go, wow, now there is a pop singer. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if Marilyn Monroe is base 5. Sex symbols, you know, Elvis Presley seems like a base 5 figure. I mean, these base 5 kind of the celebrity, the glamour, the glitz, all of this stuff, and then how empty they often feel inside because they don't get to actually experience their own subjectivity. They experience their objectified nature to others. So what Ra says as a signpost, if you're base 5 or if you know someone who's base 5, a signpost to your living your design is how unforgettable you are. Most base 5s are going to be completely forgettable because they become like space. They blend with space. They merge with their environment. They become what Ra called furniture. You know, you don't even remember if they're at the party. Actually, how Ra put it, he said, a base 5 person's living their design if they're memorable, but most of them, you don't remember if they were there or not. They're the people you go, were they there? Did I meet them? You forget their name again and again. You forget their face. Their face blends with other people's faces. It's only really when they're living their design that they then step into embodying this archetypal force, and then they become, you know, an exemplary of type. They become an exemplary of fantasy. And then they embrace their own subjectivity, their subjecthood. From that, they then develop their own rhythm and their own timing. And if you look at what type is about, generator, manifestor, projector, reflector, it is about rhythm and timing in a big way. It actually is about what is your timing? Are you waiting to respond? Are you initiating? Are you waiting for invitations? Are you waiting for the cycle? I mean, rhythm and timing is a huge part of finding your natural rhythm through living your type. So these keywords do connect from the surface of where type comes all the way from base, really. Type is like the ultimate surface level, and base is the ultimate deepest level, and yet they have this continuity here through base 5. No, this is about the personality Sun Earth base. Yeah, all base 5 personality will have a base 4 design. And we do have keynotes, which we looked at in a previous session. We have keynotes for what the different combinations are, although they're kind of unusual keynotes. Let me share them again for those who missed it. The base 5 personality is called the priest. And so the base 5 priest is an observer of the Maya illusion in a stylized body, because style comes out of design. Style is designed, and that is design base 4. So personality base 5 with design base 4 is called the priest, the observers of the Maya in a stylized body. Personality base 4 have design base 3. Those are sumos, designers in solid bodies. Personality base 3, the dragonfly, survivors in bodies that evolve. Personality base 2, like me, I'm a magpie, and I'm a collector in an active body. And then personality base 1, like Mike, he's a poltergeist, a mover in an illusionary body. So kind of cute keynotes there. Okay, well, let's return to some of the mysterious keynotes that we have here, and just kind of, these are the microcosmic keynotes. Each base has microcosmic and macrocosmic keynotes. The microcosmic relate more to our own subjective experience of that. So you can tell someone whose base 5 is really living their purpose and living their design when they have a larger-than-life archetypal quality to them, kind of like what we think of when we think of the 5th line, the projection field and all of that. Somebody who elicits a lot of fantasy, and somebody who has their own rhythm, their own timing. Base 5 is most receptive to base 4 and most received by base 1. And Ra doesn't really explain what he means by this receptivity, other than perhaps if you or someone you know is base 5, you might see if they are receiving information from base 4 people in their life, that if base 4 can get through to them in some way. Ra was base 4. And I mean, I wonder if there's some special connection where base 5 people are able to kind of take in from Ra. But, you know, I wouldn't take that very far, because it doesn't seem like that there is that sort of limitation. And in other places, Ra talks about how the nodal bases are actually the determining factor of who you can reach, who you can actually connect with, has more to do with the nodal base than your actual personality base. We have some keynotes here as well, a little bit of the poetry of base. So this is about base 5, the subjective, and it's about space. And space is form. Form is illusion. Illusion is hearing. Hearing is music, and music is freedom. So I love this connection to space not being a visual field, but being a hearing field. And I think it's really true. I've noticed how films, it's the sound effects and the auditory that really give the illusion of being physically in that space. You hear the echo, you hear the reverb, you hear the sound effects and so on. And that's part of what gives the illusion. I used to be a virtual reality developer doing VR, and the sound was such a crucial part of it. If you just put on the goggles and experience without the sound, it doesn't do half as much than compared to having spatial headset. I mean, I would even say a spatial headset with a 2-dimensional image can put you more into that space than a 3-dimensional virtual reality image, but no sound. So there is something very auditory about space, and also this is where we get the connection to the personality being transmitted through the voice, the rhythm of the voice, the timing of the voice. Ra said that the fifth line particularly calls through the voice. An auditorium is a space. Yeah, good point. Yeah, an auditorium where we listen. But all auditory communication is ultimately transmitting the personality in a way that the visual doesn't. And when you really hear someone talk, it's kind of like if you've never heard them talk before and you've only seen pictures, then you hear them talk for the first time, and you can be shocked because their voice might not be able to carry what you'd imagined their voice sounded like, right? Or their voice might carry it very well, and you might fall in love with that person just from their voice. I mean, Ra talked about the 12 different possible color combinations of the fifth line personality profile and how each of them had a unique signature to their voice, to the timbre of their voice and the rhythm and the quality of their voice, and how the fifth line is so connected to the voice as the way of calling and reaching people and really connecting with them. This is a quote from Ra. The hearing is music is about orchestrating life. It is about harmonizing life. And in many senses, it is the most homogenizing of all expressions. You know that music is homogenizing. Yeah, I mean, this is continuity to the fifth color, which is the conditioner trajectory, conditioner conditioned. I mean, Ra talked a lot about deconditioning, but he was really just conditioning us, reconditioning us with certain patterns that he felt were better or more helpful than the bad patterns we'd already learned. Music is homogenizing. You discovered that when you were a teenager. There was some singer or group, and they released a very catchy song, and every one of your generation bought it, listened to it over and over again, had it in their head, and it stayed in their head. It stayed there. A whole generation took a set of music and lyrics and hardwired them into their brain. And Ra says he can still do his share of the music that influenced him as a teenager. It's never left him, nor the sentiments that were carried in that music. Those things get burnt into us. We are acoustically homogenized. It's one of the most powerful things that we have as beings, how we are being constantly moved to be harmonic in the way we think. This is the principle of I think. We're supposed to think in harmony with others. This is homogenization. You can see that in the construct of political parties, where the platforms of political parties are basically just simply polarities of certain set concepts, and everything that is in the full spectrum in between is being subjugated to a central dynamic in order to homogenize everybody to that particular song. And every political party and every company has a product and has advertising slogans and singing salespeople. It goes on and on. The illusion is maintained, and harmony is one of the ways it is controlled, to get people to harmonize in the way they think. And then music is freedom. Being homogenized, but if you really deconstruct it, it's leading to one of these goads, one of these dreams that's built into this illusion, the illusion to be free of the form, the illusion to be able to transcend the form, to go to God, this illusion that one can leave the hard life behind. Freedom, but of course it's subjective. It's not the objective, it's subjective. So these keynotes of freedom is like built into the illusion. I mean, even the idea of free will and free choice and all of this kind of comes at this level. Ra tells us that the other four bases come together in the illusion. You take the trajectory of manifestation, and so let's see, trajectory is first base, manifestation is fourth base. The trajectory is third base. So the third and the fourth base, the trajectory of manifestation, and then second and first base, the spirit of relation. And all of it in the illusion is a matter of timing. So if our body is responsible for our trajectory and how we live in the body, our chemistry and so on ultimately defines our trajectory, which is a funny idea itself, right? That if you take care of the body and if the body is happy and has good chemicals and so on, we get a different life trajectory. If you're in a really bad mood and you meet somebody, you don't get that job and your whole life ends up differently. So that the chemistry of the body is ultimately the trajectory, and that leads to the manifestation from the fourth base of what the life actually manifests. And then you take the spirit of relation, what spirit you bring in your relation to others, base 2 and 3, 2 and 1, I mean. And then together, the trajectory of manifestation and the spirit of relation come together, and it's a matter of timing. And, you know, if you'd met them one day prior, you would have been in a great mood and your trajectory would have been different. And you would have manifested something different in life. And if you'd met them one day later, your spirit would have been stronger and you would have been able to relate to them in a different way. And all of these things, it's a matter of timing. It's all a matter of timing. And that's where the other bases all come together in base 5, in the illusion of the Maya. And why timing is sort of a supreme principle that ultimately, this is probably why Ra developed the idea of the aura types that each have their own timing and the ability of following strategy and authority to discover the right timing and the right rhythm for you so that you get the right trajectory and you manifest the right things and you have the healthy spirit and you relate to the right others and all of this stuff. So it really is kind of the deep substrate that led to the development of strategy and authority and type and all of these things. As we saw before, strategy and authority can even be seen in the, let me find the graphic here. It can be seen in how the mind has to reach the movement of life. And basically, the mind is cut off from the movement of life. So the only way the mind can actually access the movement of life is through getting in touch with the body and getting in touch with the design. And so even the idea of strategy and authority is a way to sort of put the mind at ease by giving it something to watch, which is the physical reactions in the body and what comes to you through the design, what appears as if out of nowhere, as inner knowings and things like that. And so you're giving the mind something to do so that, because it can't access the movement of life directly, it can only get to the movement of life through this sort of surrogate pathways. And so the mind is sort of being given something to watch, like wait for the response, wait for the, I mean, even telling someone to wait is such a mental thing. The body never waits. I mean, the design never waits. Like waiting is the only thing you can tell the mind to do. The mind can either be making decisions and causing a lot of problems, or it can be waiting. But it's only really the mind that waits. If you think about it, the movement doesn't wait. The movement's always moving. The body's not waiting. It's breathing and sleeping and doing all the things it does. The design isn't waiting. It's constantly producing new information and new mental images and all of these things. It's really the mind that can wait. And so we actually see where strategy and authority has its origins in base theory. This is one of my replies to the critics of human design, particularly in the development of type and strategy and authority, is like, well, the voice didn't give that to Ra. Well, the voice gave him base, and base is where it came from. And if you can really decode base at a deep level, you can see why he developed strategy and authority, why he developed the idea of the aura types. These things came from somewhere, and it wasn't just his imagination. They actually came from a deep part of the knowledge. All right, so let's take a look at any other notes here. So you could take the other 4 elements of base 1 through 4, and they each ultimately become, I'm just going to put these in the comments actually. They ultimately, thank you, Rachel, I appreciate that. And a question from Nicola. This is meaty stuff. She likes it, good. And what are my thoughts on the design sun-earth tone as being our actual inner authority? So this is something that comes from comments that Ra made in Rave Anatomy. This also comes from John Martin and Teresa Blanding. I mean, I think it depends what we mean by that, but in some sense that design tone is expressive of your design's intelligence. And so, yeah, like when we're looking at the base here and we're seeing that the mind has to get in touch with the design or the body, well, yeah, it makes sense that if your body is operating correctly and you're able to notice physical innervations in the body and you have splenic authority, and then you notice that you wince when somebody asks you to go to lunch, or you have sacral authority and you notice that your body, shrinks and shrivels, or you have any of these things, like, yeah, like you're noticing the body or you're noticing the design, which may not be physical, but it may be a strong inner mental image or some sort of unconscious being made conscious, because the design is really what we call the unconscious. So yeah, I mean, I guess it is saying that the design side tone is the cognition of the body and of the unconscious. And if you notice that, but I mean, I think it's just the real question is like, what do we mean by that? Teresa Blanding and John Martin really made some pretty bizarre claims because of that. Claims that I don't think had any real basis. I have not found them to scale whatsoever. They're basically patterns that they found that didn't really make a lot of sense to me. I mean, I think ultimately, like, yeah, you can say that the tone of your design Sun Earth is a fundamental aspect of the sensorial, physical intelligence of the body. And as the physical intelligence of the body, when you tap into that and notice the information that it's delivering, that is kind of equivalent to what we're doing with strategy and authority. You're waiting, the mind is learning to wait to receive signals from the body and or the unconscious before acting. So the mind is learning to wait and stop initiating action. Even manifestors, they don't initiate with the mind, they initiate mechanically with the right timing and the right rhythm. So yeah, I think it's like it's saying a similar thing. I just don't think that we can necessarily change conclusions. Like, to me, it's another way of phrasing the same thing that strategy and authority is saying. It's saying that you have a unique rhythm and timing that you need to follow in order to make healthy decisions for yourself. And if you rush yourself to make those decisions, or you don't give enough time for them, or you don't wait for the signals, then you're going to be making mental decisions that are sort of preempting the ability for the healthy decision making to actually operate on its own. It's saying the same thing. John Martin and Teresa Blanding seem to think it was saying something different. They seem to think unless you have design activations, that means that you don't actually have an inner authority that operates that way, and your aura type changes and all this different stuff. And even, John Martin was saying that, like, because he has tone 5, that it gives him, I think, was he tone 5? He basically had some conclusions, which to me just actually sounded a lot more like his channels. Like, I think he had 6447, and to me it sounded like he was describing his 6447. Didn't really sound like he was describing the tone. So, I mean, it's a good question. There's definitely, it's definitely important. I mean, I actually think Steve Rhodes cracked it wide open when he looked at the tonal binaries and really made that connection much more strongly. Like, I have tone 2 on my design Sun Earth. That is absolutely has a certain survivalist quality that I'm going to be put in a really good mood when I succeed at winning limited resources, things like that. Like, that sort of level of analysis makes a lot of sense to me. But if you say, Jonah, you don't need to listen to your sacral, you don't need to notice when you feel this, immediate shriveling up inside versus you feel this sort of relaxed, kind of noticing the availability of the energy, to me, that's different than noticing when I'm in a really good mood from winning with my splenic tone. Like, it's a different experience. Like, one I experience in my sacral, the other I sort of experience as this survivalist thing. I don't know how to describe it, but it's just a little different. So, yeah, I don't think that that's really. To me, the question is not fully formed. Like, the design Sun Earth tone, is that our actual inner authority? That's too much of an abstract concept. Like, what does that even mean? Our actual inner authority. How does that even? And if you want to comment on that, maybe we can talk about it after base today, because I'd be happy to go into some of the ways we can interpret that. But to me, that's kind of like, it's using such big abstract nouns that are so vague already that it's not actually. Like, there's, it's kind of like saying, like, is our inner authority truly in the channel or is it in the center? It's kind of a good question there, right? Like, I don't know, right? What's the difference? So is it the channel that's the authority? Is it the center that's the authority? I mean, I guess it's the center, but the center wouldn't be defined if it wasn't for the channel. So yeah, happy to stick around after base to today and we can talk about it a bit. Okay, so here are Oh, I'd like to. Okay, first I'll clarify, and then we'll look at the final bits of this. The final bits are kind of how we can combine the keynotes of the other bases to arrive at base 5. Okay, so Nancy clarifying. To clarify, Jonah, if she heard correctly, strategy and authority was not given by the voice, but base theory is, or was, absolutely. So Ra developed and defined the design of oneself, base 4, the naming and presentation of the type, base 5, strategical application, base 4, and training people's minds, base 2, to memorize or recognize the archetypal role. Then it becomes base 3, genetic, interesting, which moves base 1, life, with new unique definition to where one belongs. I mean, that's definitely one way of connecting it. I was saying even just more simply. I mean, I think, yeah, you're seeing even a bigger picture here, that he really designed the whole system and conditioned them through base 5 personality and so on. The way that I understood it when he described where strategy and authority came from, he just said the mind has no direct access to the movement of life. So this is the difference between base 2 and base 1. The mind is detached from the movement of life. We can only really remember things. We only have memory when we can stop the movement of life. And when life is constantly moving, we can't go off into memory because we're, if we're running through the forest, we're dodging trees and trying to not collide and stuff like that. We can't be off in some reverie of memory. Like, we have to stop the movement of life in order to go into the mind. And then what ends up happening is, from this place of the mind basically has no access to the movement of life, but it does have access to the body, and it does have access to the design, or the unconscious. And so through its access to those, which then in turn have access to the movement of life, we get a sort of surrogate access to life. And so ultimately, the way Ra described it was that the mind is being taught how to observe or wait for new information to arrive from these other avenues so that it can make the correct decision, because it has no direct access to the movement of life. So it's like life is going on and changing, and I'm living in the past with my mind and experiencing, kind of assuming with my top-down processing that I like certain things and I don't like others. But actually, what I like and dislike will change, and what's satisfying to my sacral one day will not be satisfying the next day. And what fulfills my purpose one day is not fulfilling my purpose the next. And so, the mind wants to just make one decision once and then always keep it every time. It's like a policy. But that's not how the world works. The world keeps moving, and so we have to continue to make new decisions each day. And that's really the exhausting part of it, for the mind anyway, because the mind is like, how can I make a new decision each day? You mean I have to recompute and recalculate what the best decision will be? And it's like, no, you don't have to compute or calculate anything. The mind is kind of under the assumption it has to weigh all the variables and make the best decision. And how could it do that every single instant of every single day? It's impossible. The only thing that can do that is when you're living your design, or in touch with your body, I guess either way, your unconscious or your body, because those are constantly being updated by the changing movement of life. But I mean, yeah, that's, oh, thanks for that. Thanks for that comment, Nicola. Yeah, that's kind of how I think of it. It's like the mind wants to just be like, I'm done. I've decided and I'm finished. But life goes on, and that's the challenge. So we're going to just look at some of these keynotes, and then I'll open it up to general discussion, and then we can return to the tone question, which is a really, really great topic. And thanks for bringing that up, Nicola. So the keynotes, this might be a little bit of keynote soup, but we'll just take them one at a time. And this is straight from Ra. What he basically says is, you can take the keynotes of the 4 bases that we already looked at, and those 4 come together to generate each of the keynotes of base 5. So you can take the activity of character. Activity is base 1, character is base 2. And the biology of humanness, bases 3 and 4. And it comes out in the Maya as type. So how does your character act in the world? What character you have? We know that's a base 2 thing. Like, do you have like a, strong sense of character? Do you have a sense of justice or injustice, or however that is? The activity of how your character acts in the world as well as the biology of your humanness. And biology here, I think he really means like, I mean, it's an interesting question. What does he really mean? But really like your physical form, your objective form, and it's kind of like the humanness is almost like the humanness is like the information aspect of it, and the biology is the energy. We could look at it that way, maybe. Like the humanness, the humanity. It's like the difference between the face and the head, kind of. The head is the biology, and the face is the humanness, the humanity. And so you take the activity of character and the biology of humanness, and in the Maya, these all come together as type. So what type someone is, how are they expressed as a type? This is a very mysterious thing to say. That ultimately, what is type? Type, like the girl next door type, the rock star type, the boy band type, any of these kind of types is ultimately the combination of how their character acts in the world, and then how they're biologically, the biological underpinnings combined with their humanness, their humanity. So yeah, definitely something. If you do end up watching the new Anne Hathaway movie, the thought of you, the idea of you, good movie by the way. If you do end up watching that, you can think about how the guy in that is very base 5, and he does have a certain character that acts in the world a certain way, and that he has a certain biological presence that you're kind of like, wow, that's a fine biological specimen of humanity. And that together, that all comes together as this type. And it's like in the boy bands, they always have the different types. They always have the strong silent type, and the artist poet type, and the adventurer type, and the builder type, the kind of guy next door, the farmer with his shirt rolled up, or they're like, the boy band never is made of like 5 people of the same type. It's always like one of each type. They're always pentas, and there's always one of each type. I really think you could do a whole series on base 5 and boy bands and like K-pop bands, and just kind of look at, or the Spice Girls, or any of these, and kind of look at how this is like the wild type versus this is the kind of librarian buttoned down type versus this is the tough guy type versus this is the like motor girl type, all that stuff. So type really is the combination of activity, character, biology, and humanness. Next set, and if there's any comments on these, this is pretty dense stuff, so I won't pretend to know what Ra really meant at every aspect of his keynoting here. The next thing Ra tells us is that you can take the reaction of separation. So reaction is base 1, separation is base 2. As we talked about in our base 1 and 2 class, separation can be like being isolated, being made fun of, being kicked out of groups, being alienated. And then what is the reaction that occurs? How do you react when you have that separation? How do they react to you that leads to the separation? And the chemistry of growth. The reaction of separation and the chemistry of growth, and that appears as fantasy. What an interesting, I think a philosopher could spend their whole career just trying to deconstruct this one sentence. You know what I mean? How the reaction of separation and the chemistry of growth, that there has to be the right chemistry there to grow. You don't grow if you're not nourished. You don't grow if you're frustrated or bitter or disappointed. You don't grow or angry, that the chemistry has to be correct to facilitate the growth and the reaction to the separation. And then if you're able to grow, and if you're able to have that healthy chemistry, and if you're able to separate gracefully, and if you're able to have that reaction that is like, I guess we could say a positive reaction, not a destructive negative reaction, then that comes out in the Maya as fantasy. And you ultimately exemplify the fantasy of what would it be like to be a celebrity? What would it be like to be in this boy band and be able to travel around the world? And what would it be like to be, that people fantasize about this? This is where we get line 5 from, right? This is, the fifth line ultimately is the expression of the 5th base, and we have a continuity there from the 5th base all the way up to the line. Which is just a funny note, by the way, because Ra always likes to say there really isn't a sixth line, that the sixth line is like there's no line behind it. Well, yeah, because there's no sixth base. So that's why the sixth line, the line of transition, is really kind of the lack of any line. Comment from Rachel. Reaction of separation in chemistry of growth reminds her of starting plants from cuttings. That's such a, yeah, absolutely. And we kind of start our life as cuttings, cuttings from the life of origin that we kind of separate from. The next series of keynotes, which is an agricultural fantasy. Funny, yeah, I suppose so. Okay, you can take the limitation of nature, so base 1 and 2 again, and the objectivity of decay, and it comes out in the Maya as subjectivity. I mean, this is really profound here because one of the great questions of the philosophies of the ages is, where does subjectivity come from? And what Ra is telling us is it actually comes out of objectivity, which is funny, right? This funny idea that it's not like subjectivity and objectivity are polar opposites. It's that subjectivity emerges out of objectivity, but not just any objectivity. The objectivity of decay, the fact that decay is an objective principle, that you can't maintain the same chemistry forever. It's like anyone who has, even people who don't have, emotional definition, we know you can't stay on that high forever. You can't stay in that, honeymoon phase forever. You get this amazing chemistry, you feel like it'll never end, and then you wake up the next day and it's gone. And that is the objectivity of decay, that the chemistry, the objective, ultimately decays, it ultimately changes, and it wears down. And that it's because of the limitation of nature as well that we have subjectivity, that our subjectivity is inextricably tied to limitation. The subjectivity is limitation in that sense, that it is our own limited view that gives us our subjectivity. There's a great quote from Alenka Zupančič. I won't derail too much into philosophy, but she talks about how scientists are always trying to gain the upper hand against philosophers and psychologists and so on by saying, well, you guys are just subjective. It's just your opinion. And science is the only valid way to approach reality because we're truly objective. And she says that there are different yardsticks of validity, that the scientific yardstick of validity is its objectivity. But actually, you can only see certain things from this objective neutral view from above. That actually hides all sorts of antagonisms and all sorts of dichotomies and conflicts that can only be seen from particular subjective positions. She calls them subject positions. So it's like you imagine a chessboard, and if you see the whole board from above, that's what scientists are trying to do. They're trying to see the God's eye view, the neutral view from above. But actually, there's certain things that they miss that you can only see from this or that particular place on the chessboard. And it's only if you could actually see it from that perspective would you actually then be able to see that conflict. So she says that the validity of something like psychoanalysis is precisely because it reveals antagonisms that are otherwise hidden. And so this is the value of subjectivity. It's not enough to merely be objective. We also have to go beyond objectivity and ask ourselves, what can we see from particular limitations, from particular limited views? Science wants to see from the unlimited view. And you can see all sorts of stuff from the unlimited view, but you actually miss certain things that you can only see from limited views. Pretty dense stuff today. Thanks for following along. So here's the next set, and we only have one more after this. So you can take the perspective of integration and the geometry of continuity, and it comes out in the Maya as rhythm. So if we want to know what the origin of rhythm is, the origin of the repetition, or the rhythm being like a certain repeating pattern that I guess, if we get into a healthy rhythm, it's the rhythm of like the rhythm of the generator is to respond, the rhythm of the manifester to, initiate all of these things. That only comes from the perspective of integration. So basically being able to integrate our perspective with other perspectives, and the geometry of continuity, which is a very mysterious idea here, but that when we actually have that rhythm is continuity, that one of the four constituent parts of rhythm is continuity. You can't get into a rhythm if it's discontinuous, if you're constantly stopping your habits and changing your habits and moving your habits. And there is no rhythm then. There's no, right? It's just this discontinuous thing. There's a beautiful quote from the philosopher Gilles Deleuze, who I know I'm always quoting. And what he says is basically that there's to paraphrase, that for an artist, the artist cannot simply create a piece of work, of artwork. They create a world for that artwork to live in. But going beyond that, what they're trying to do by creating a world is they're trying to create what he calls a plane of immanence, which is basically this thing that actually has continuity. It's like conceptual continuity. It continues. It goes on living even after the artist stops making the work. It's like this world that continues. But he says the only way to do this is to find the meeting point between the habits of the artist and the habits of their artwork. So the artist must first find their habits that bring them into contact with this world. And so they have to create their own plane of immanence. They kind of create two. They have to first create a life for themselves that has its own rhythm and continuity, waking up at a certain time, drinking the coffee, having the cigarette, or maybe they stay up late, or maybe they get up early, or they use this or that substance, or this or that exercise, or prayer, or however it is. Yeah, no, it definitely has, yeah, it's like they have to design their own rhythm, yeah, base 4 and base 5. Is that what you're saying there, Rachel? But it's basically this interesting idea that the artist kind of creates their own world based on their habits, and then from there they can create the world for their art to live in, and that there's these two series, the series of events in their life and the series of events in their body of work. And those series are constantly colliding, overlapping, moving along in lockstep, and then diverging, and then reconnecting, and so on. So yeah, it's really like the habits of the artist and the habits of the artwork. And this, to me, speaks to the geometry of continuity that comes out in the Maya as rhythm. What is the rhythm of the artist, and what is the rhythm of their artwork? And then the last one here. You can take the trajectory of manifestation and the spirit of relation. Didn't we already have these? Spirit of relation, wasn't this the first one? I guess not. That's interesting. Huh. Okay, I guess not. I was reading these before. I guess I just kind of touched on some of these. All right. Yeah, this is the last one. You can take the trajectory of manifestation and the spirit of relation. And it comes out in the Maya as timing. And this is really like the cherry on top of the whole thing. I mean, this is where Ra ends his work on base. It's like basically saying like the ultimate final outcome of base 5, like the final crowning achievement of base 5 is timing. And what is timing? Timing has 4 parts to it: the trajectory of manifestation and the spirit of relation. So, I mean, it's really kind of an interesting, mysterious statement here, but that trajectory and manifestation, that's bases 3 and 4, and then spirit of relation, bases 2 and 1. And it comes out in the Maya as timing. So that all correct timing, all right timing is ultimately because the spirit is correct and its ability to relate is correct, and the trajectory is right. You're on the right trajectory, and you're manifesting what you came here to manifest. You're creating what you came here to create, and ultimately that comes out as timing. So with that, I think we're done with the keynotes. It is always quite a lot. I mean, we just went through 25 keynotes in about 8 minutes. So thank you all for joining me on that exploration. These definitely, if there's one thing worth printing out and kind of just hanging up on the wall to see every day, I think it really is the keynotes here, you know. The keynotes, sorry, I don't have a larger graphic of it, but yeah, it's definitely worth pondering on these keynotes. They are worth pondering, and you can get a lot of, yeah, definitely fridge worthy. Absolutely, Rachel. So maybe I can put together some print quality graphics that I'll share on the Discord, or you might be able to track them down. So yeah, I'd love to open it up. Oh yeah, fridge magnets would be great. I'd love to open it up to any discussion. If anyone would like to discuss anything we've just talked about, anything about base 5. Otherwise, we can certainly return to the question of tone brought up by Nicola, which was a very interesting one itself. But yeah, if anyone has any comments, questions, anything that that this brings up for you, it's definitely a dense area of study, and I know that it can be hard to see the immediate value, but I do think there's a lot of value here. It's just value that reveals itself as a reward for the effort of close examination. Comment from Rachel, these little koans at the end are amazing. Yeah, I like them a lot. Thank you. I'll share those in the Discord as well. Okay, well, if anyone has, yeah, comments, anything?
Oh, yeah, I had a question. So this is my first base chat that I'm tuning into, so I probably need to go back and check out the first ones for some greater context. But I mean, base is something that changes so quickly, and I'm not quite sure exactly what my base would be because it changes within a minute or something for me. So do you have
Yeah,
a
if you happen to be born on like one side or the other, then it could be within a few seconds. But that's also true of line or tone or anything. If you're born right on the edge, otherwise, I believe it's every 7.5 minutes, something like that. So I mean, if you're born in the middle of it, then you have 3 minutes on each side.
Yeah, it's and you've been talking a lot about the personality base. So is that sort of the more like the one that we look at when we start getting into base predominantly?
Yeah. I mean, base, absolutely. So the personality base is whenever Ra talks about the base, he's really talking about, well, he's either talking about personality base or he's just talking about base as a principle. Because the thing is, there's this idea that the bases are actually dimensions, for instance. And so when you look at the base as dimension, he's not even really talking about this or that personality or design base or any person of that base. I mean, it really depends what level we're talking about. So one way of looking at base is what can we say about all the people who are base 1, all the people who are base 2, all the people who are base 3, 4, 5. That's basically saying what does it mean when you have that personality base. There's also a little discussion of what does it mean to have that base on the design side, but because there's only one possibility, like all base 5 people automatically have base 4 on the design side. So because of that, you can kind of bundle it in as the same. If you want to talk about what do all personality base 5 people have in common, you're also talking about what do all design base 4 people have in common. So that's kind of the same thing. There's no real reason to talk about them separately because it's not like profile where you have 2 different possible design lines for every personality line. You only, every base 2 personality has a base 1 design every time, So because of that, when we're talking about like what does it mean for a person to have a certain base, we're just talking about the personality base. And that's like when Ra talks about the signposts of that base, like the signpost for a base 5 person being how unforgettable they are and how larger than life and archetypal they are and how they express a sort of larger than life quality. That's what he's talking about for somebody that actually is personality base 5. Then there's the sense that all of us experience all 5 bases, and that's kind of what I was talking about when I showed the base mat. Let me see if I can pull that up again. Basically, when we're looking at the base mat, you can kind of imagine that you're in this cockpit, that you're the passenger, and the passenger is getting to experience what it is to be present in space, in the Maya, and then they're getting to move from the presence in the Maya into their memories of the mind, into the feelings of the body, into their dream world and inner visionary space of the unconscious, or into the pure movement, like through dance or sports or something where you completely merge with the movement of the world. So those are really just subjective experiences that we all have, regardless of what personality base we have.
Mm.
Right? Those are just subjective experiences that we get to experience what it's like to merge with the world. We get to experience what it's like to go off into memory, and the memory feels so real you could touch it, things like that. Or to feel so hungry that the only thing that exists is the hunger, and we feel the body, or so much pleasure or so much pain. Those physical experiences. Nothing else exists. Or even the visionary state where you go so fully into a dream that nothing else exists besides that dream world. So that's the sort of microcosmic level of how we experience these different dimensions, even while we're sitting still. We're not moving in the three dimensions, and yet we're moving into these other base dimensions. But then he doesn't stop there. He also gives us macrocosmic keynotes, and the macrocosmic actually relate to things like physics, and they relate to the actual makeup of the universe and the cosmos, and they also relate to evolutionary movements over time. So you can see how base one is sort of the original evolutionary development of needing to find a new location. Um, Base two is then once you've settled in that location, you build on it, and you build hierarchies and you build status. Base three is now that you've built a town, how do you get along and not kill each other? And you could see how someone who has this base, that's part of their role. Like a base three person is kind of here to make sure everybody gets along. A base two person is sort of here to make sure that the status is respected and to make sure that we can build together. A base one is here to define and discover new things, and so on. So that it's not that but it's like he can talk about them without really caring about who is what base, really just saying at a high level view, this is what different people are here to do. Base four is the principle of designing the world and designing all the schools and the prisons and the making green mean go and red mean stop. I mean, it was a base four person who came up with that, I'm sure. And then base five is ultimately here to give us fantasy and to give us celebrity and glamour and to give us freedom, even, or the notion of freedom, to give us music. So, I mean, somebody who has one of these bases for their personality base, part of their role in this life and in every life, because base doesn't change life to life, is going to be to fulfill some of these jobs. And yet we can also talk about those bases without talking about any specifics about, oh, I'm base two and Ra was base four and so on. So there's really just a lot of different levels to look at. There's sort of the sense that we all get to experience all the bases. There's the macrocosmic view of how they actually relate to the makeup of our entire cosmos. There's the slightly less but still macrocosmic view of how it relates to human evolution and the evolution of consciousness. So, I mean, these things are very, they work at many different levels.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
exactly. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
studying like science or something. It's the same kind of thing. Like you could say like, it's just the added thing is that you can study it, but then you can also see how each of us has a certain role to fulfill, which is a little bit different. It's almost like if you're studying quantum physics and you're like, these people are responsible for the waveform collapse, and those are responsible for the wave particle duality. And, so it's kind of funny in that way, right? Like we're studying like the science of the Maya. How does the illusion work? How does it all come together? But then we also realize that each of us has a contribution to make for it to all work.
Okay. And would you say, so I'm probably a base three, but to go back and listen to maybe three and four, because a few minutes later it changes to four and just see which I resonate more to?
Well, yeah, or you could look at, I mean, base three are ultimately here to make sure everybody gets along. So it's like cooperation in the service of cooperation. Let's all cooperate so that we can cooperate. Like there's no extra point to it. It's not like cooperate so we can build something or cooperate so we can change the world together or cooperate. It's more just like, let's just get along, because if we don't get along, we're going to kill each other. So base three is literally just this principle of helping people get along. And some of the signposts for a base three person living their life have to do with the body. So you can look at the body signposts there. A base four
Mm.
person like Ra or like Ricky we have here, they're much more about designing things and creating things. And I always recommend to base four people that they really develop their own system, that not necessarily human design, that they kind of develop their own keynotes, develop their own words for things, develop their own ways of describing things, basically design the system that they would want, not take a ready-made system that already exists, because that's one of their great gifts. I mean, base 4 is really gifted in developing and creating and designing their own way of doing things. And of course, Ra was base 4. If somebody had given him human design, he never would have got into it. Not in a million years, right? He had to build it himself. It's the principle of ego. So yeah, I mean, you can definitely look at bases 3 and 4 and see which one seems, closer to what your role is. And I mean, this is also something that is a limitation of the personality crystal, that it will always be the same base, no matter what. So no matter how many lifetimes you have, every single life, same base. And that's something else that's kind of limiting, but also relieving, but also maybe terrifying. I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting idea, right? It's like you're kind of stuck having the same project every single life. And if you're base 3, that project is helping people get along and really nourishing and nurturing them and being nourished and nurtured by them and making sure that the body is taken care of. And it's the ultimate yin, the double yin. It's the mother principle. You're basically here in the service of the great mother. And if you're base 4, that's the eldest daughter, and you're really here to build the schools and maybe a new kind of school no one's ever seen before, a new kind of prison no one's ever seen before, a new kind of life, a new kind of system, a new way of approaching things. That's what base 4 is here to do.
Interesting. I really like that analogy with the oldest daughter and the mother.
Yeah,
So
those are
what
from the I Ching. Yeah.
is there a continuity, a genetic continuity between base 3 and line 3?
Yeah, absolutely. All these things kind of appear, on the surface one way or another. So, I mean, some of them are easier to see than others. Like it's not really base 5 is very easy to see with line 5, because it's so much of it sounds like it's about the projection field and fantasy and, illusion and all this stuff. It's harder to see the continuity from base 1 to line 1, because it's like, what does movement have to do with this extremely fixed line? Right? It doesn't sound like much of anything, really. So, I mean, some of them are a little easier to see than others, but theoretically, yes. Theoretically, there is some deep connection between the base and the line. I don't know how direct that connection is. There's also like other interesting things, like some of the bases, just how they appear on the surface, so to speak, is actually in a whole aspect of human design. So like Ra tells us that base 2, which is all about having a role, well, that appears as profile. So that's kind of an interesting thing, right? It's like, it's not like base 2 just appears as line 2. Base 2 appears as the entire concept of having a profile, the entire concept of having a role to play. That all comes from base 2. So base 2 people are very role-oriented people. I'm a base 2 person, and what really got me into human design was studying profile. Profile was the only thing I used for quite a while. I wasn't interested in the centers or the channels or the lines or the types. I was interested in profile. That's what got me. I was interested in this idea that we all have a role to play, and what is my role, and what are people's roles. So I think what base you are may also have something to do with what parts of human design really speak to you. Base 4 has connections to manifestation as well as the ego. This is a deep similarity between having a defined ego and being a manifester. They're similar in some way. Obviously, they're very different in other ways, and not every manifester will have a defined ego, and most people with defined egos aren't manifestors, but there's some deep similarity between the two, like maybe like wanting to do something once and not having to do it again, or doing something your way and kind of being stubborn about being yourself and having a backbone and not being here to respond to others and things like that. Of course, you get defined ego generators. They are here to respond to others, so then you get into all sorts of complexities there. But it's really just saying that when you study base, you really see all of the building blocks that Ra put together to build the human design system. They're all there. The keynotes, all of it. So
I like it. Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. Well, for anyone who wants to stick around, maybe we'll just talk for a moment. I do have to drop off pretty soon because we have, I think it's only in 10 minutes. Okay. we have like a few minutes to talk about it, and then we're going to jump on to the personality typology study group. So if anyone needs to drop off, thank you all for coming today. Really good to see you, Lisita. Thank you, everyone. Let's just talk briefly about the tone question. What are some of the possible meanings of design, sun, earth, tone? Like, what would that change, if anything, if that's the origin of strategy and authority? Like, that we really just need to pay attention to that particular sense. Like, I'm taste, so I would pay attention to my biological sense of taste. Is that kind of getting at it, or I mean, what do you get from that, Nicola? I should ask.
Yeah, so it's just something that I've been noticing. I had a reading with Lara Joe, and this is sort of her whole premise from going into, and it's all just about substructure basically. And um, so I'm a fifth tone, fifth color on my designer, yeah, design sun earth side. So I'm feeling cognition and low sound. And I'm splenic projector as well with the channel surrender. And I would say, so she talks about it in terms of the binaries. So fifth and sixth tone binary being the solar plexus binary. Um, and yeah, I would say that I definitely feel the splenic hits, but I also feel this sort of solar plexus, like it feels actually really like sometime I guess, I haven't sort of fully gone to that particular camp, but I'm considering it. I think it's an interesting sort of perspective to look at. And I really like, Jonah, how you know about all this stuff, because I'm a 4-6, not a first line, and I just don't want to do all of that investigation. So I really appreciate that you go into it and you can, I trust what the insights that you bring and the thoroughness. But yeah, so I would say that I definitely it feels calming in my body to uh acknowledging the solar plexus binary that I have in my design earth sun earth tone. But I feel that splenic hit when it comes as well. And I suppose I'm just sort of noticing both. And
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I definitely think that it's really important to look at the solar plexus binary, and I love what Steve Rhodes says about it, which is that these are basically hedonistic people who are going to be put in a really good mood through pleasure and pleasurable things. And, I don't get
Mm-hmm.
put in a good mood through that. I could have the most amazing, pleasurable meal or massage or experiential encounter, sexual encounter, anything. I mean, when we get to the solar plexus, we're kind of talking about all of the human experiential things, and yet, that's not going to put me in a good mood necessarily. That's not going to necessarily bring me happiness at a deep level. What Steve Rhodes claims is that actually that the design sun earth tone is what truly makes your body happy, and what binary it's in is what brings you happiness. And so he claims to have discovered happiness, something Ra never talked about. I kind of imagine if you would have asked Ra where happiness is in the human design chart, he would probably frown. Or, I remember somebody said to him, "You're supposed to be enlightened. You don't seem very happy." And, that was the kind of thing that he hated, right? Was this sort of California School of Sunshine psychology, love and light stuff. And yet Steve Rhodes really did dig into around 2,000 biographies and categorize them all with people who had very accurate birth times, and really looked for what he could discover about their personality sun earth tone and design sun earth tone. He gave them both equal weight, and that the personality sun earth tone was simply what makes your personality happy versus what makes your body happy, or the two things that will make you happy through what you use your personality for, what you use your body for. So feeling tone on the body side is that your body would be happy when it's comfortable, happy when it's not in pain, happy when it gets new experiences because the solar plexus binary is experiential, happy through hedonistic pleasure and just enjoyment of life and kind of high quality of life. So all those things seem very accurate to me. Something else that I know, John Martin, who's really the big proponent, I'm imagining that, Lara Jones got most of this from, the big proponent of studying the tones in this way. He looked at the streams they're from. And so tone 5 would be the 6447 to the 1156, right? A stream of feeling, I
Mm.
think. And then tone
Mm-hmm.
6 would be the 1949 stream of sensitivity up to the 3740. So it's a collective abstract stream compared to tone 6, which is a tribal stream. He put a lot of weight into this, and he thought that it would give you a very abstract, imagistic, mythopoetic kind of way of being compared to somebody who had the tone 6, which would give them a much more sensitivity and kind of tribal connection. Tones 1 and 6 are tribal, and then 2 is logic, 5 is abstract, and then 3 and 4 split the logic and abstract. So there's a whole like deeper way of kind of analyzing it that John Martin would do. However, I really tried to follow that. And when I looked at a bunch of different people whose body graphs I had and very accurate times and so on, I didn't find anything to that. I found a lot more validity to what Steve Rhodes was kind of saying than John Martin in that case. But I mean, I think this is worth exploring. And I guess the real question for me is just how would that change anything? Are you still waiting for invitations and following splenic hits, or is there now like something else to follow, or is it more just like noticing? I mean, the Steve Rhodes material isn't really even talking about decision making. He's just saying notice that you'll be in a really good mood when you have physical pleasurable experiences. And I'm not put in a good mood by that. I have a splenic binary there, so I'm put in a good mood through winning. And I'm a very competitive person deep down. And that helped me. I mean, I think if anything, it helps with self-love because the more you know yourself or you kind of know what makes you happy, the more you can then love that about yourself. And maybe you might have hated that about yourself before. I mean, I grew up thinking competition is a really bad thing. And probably denying any competitive impulse and saying I'm not a competitive person and then being really competitive about that. So I think it can
Mm.
be nice to explore these binaries. I would say that the personality binary seems just as important as the design one, so I wouldn't limit it to only looking at the design sun
Mm.
earth.
Mm.
So
Yeah, that's, I mean, holistically, I have, of being splenic, I have an open solar plexus, so there's a thing around pleasure there. I'm on the cross of Eden, so I'm have this hanging 36, looking for change and new experiences and not knowing when enough is enough in terms of eating and all of these things that bring me pleasure. And that's something that's been, yeah, I don't
well,
know if
this
it's
but
just
this
a
might help
different.
with some of the self-love to say that, if you didn't have this knowledge, then you might just say, well, I have an undefined solar plexus, so me looking for pleasure is my not self. But now you can say, no, I have a design sun earth splenic, sorry, solar plexus binary. That solar plexus binary means that you are a quality of life person. You are the kind of person who really is given happiness and put in a really good mood when you have enjoyable emotional experiences or feeling experiences when you feel good just at a basic level. Let's just make it basic. It's okay to be hedonistic. And if you can love yourself as more of a hedonist, just like I can now love myself more as a competitive person, even though there's a real stigma against being a competitive person, then that can improve, right? It's like we don't have to like use some idea of the not self as an excuse to hate ourselves. There's no excuse. We
Mm.
need to practice more self-love, and this might help in that. So I do have to wrap it up simply because we have our personality typology group. Really good questions today, Nicola. I really appreciated all of them, and thank you everyone for
Thank
joining.
you, Jonah.
If anyone is
That's great.
interested in personality type, we are typing Mike, and if not, I'll be recording something, and I will share it on the group so people can watch later. So, okay, yeah, thank you, Ricky. Yeah, it's been illuminating for me as well. So, all right, take care, everyone.